Welcome to the Festival of Storytellers.
I can't tell you how excited I am to be on right now. It's been a couple of weeks of excitement, getting prepared, and I've done a lot of things in my life, but this has got to be close to the top.
Thank you, Reader's Magnet, and thank you, John, for putting this forth and taking the chance on us authors in presenting this out to the world.
I've enjoyed this immensely, Joanne.
Ellie, so have I. Thank you for who you are, and thank you, Reader's Magnet. You all are beautiful, and you've worked so very hard, and we are blessed.
We are.
I thank everybody that's involved with this process, because we know writers need readers and writers need publishers. We thank Reader's Magnet and everybody that's involved. I love Reader's Magnet. They say, we share your stories with the world.
Of Washington. I'm Bernard McAuley, originally from eastern Montana and so forth. I'm sorry, my wife has Alzheimer's and she keeps appearing into the picture here. I'm sorry very much. She's her caretaker just walked in the door, so everything just kind of come together once today. But I'm Bernard McAuley again. I'm from Washington, state of Washington. I began my childhood living on a farm in eastern Montana, 14,000 acre cattle ranch. I learned how to ride a rope and so forth in those days. And after the ranch was sold, I ended up in Glacier Park for a couple of summers while I was going to college. And there I kind of, between the ranch and there, I kind of picked up on my stories. Then I went into the service, came back to a hospital in Washington State here. Spent 5 months. And when you're 5 months in an Army hospital, it's about 4 months or 3 months not doing anything. So I kind of started out writing, at that particular time in my younger years, but some of the people saw it and they says, well, Bernie, you have a problem. You're missing some of your words. You're not actually doing this and that. Come to find out, I had dyslexia. So it kind of discouraged me for a while until my later years, after I went to work for Northwest Airlines for 38 years, retiring from there. There's a lot of stories from my age, my time with the airlines, and a lot of stories from earlier times, packing into the back of the Bob Marshall Wilderness in Montana. I've ridden up and down Pacific Crest Trail here in the state of Washington. I've been all over Asia, in Hawaii and Singapore, Philippines, Japan, China, Hong Kong, and Korea. And it's just along the way, you pick up stories and you try to remember those stories along the way. And I think I picked up my storytelling from my grandfather, who used to, during the wintertime at 20 below zero, when we were opening water hose for the cattle, we used to sit on top of this hill overlooking the whole prairie. It was just absolutely gorgeous. It was nighttime. It was cold. The wind was blowing. And that old gate pipe we had, there was an old gate post we had. It had holes in it, and it sang to us as we sat there and for snow and just the silence of the evening. The first book I wrote, kind of along my own experiences, was the Shadow of Sawtooth Ridge. If you look at it on the top there, this cover was done by Rachel Firkins. She is a friend of mine, and I asked her to do this. The mountains in the back of the ridge is the actual Sawtooth Ridge, and it's kind of on the front of the Rockies, eastern front of the Rockies. And the second book I did was also kind of the same, but of the family. This first book here is of Larry Becker. He's a POW that, get it back here where we can see it. He's a POW, comes out of Vietnam after 4 years of being in prison. He comes back to the United States, finds out that his wife has passed away of cancer just a few months before he came home. And he now has 2 kids, 2 children. And he wants to bring a new life, and he's got to someplace to go to. His family ranch is up for sale. And thanks to his father-in-law, he was able to buy the ranch and return to the shadows of the Sawtooth Ridge. One of those children that came along with him, one of his children, was her name was Joni Becker. This story, last story I did, and it's of his daughter, Larry Becker's daughter, following in his footsteps. She becomes a Navy pilot after Annapolis, after flight school and so forth. And it's kind of different because along the way, she gets the feeling that her mother just happens to be along with her on this ride. And she goes through the schools and so forth and ends up in Whidbey Island up here in state of Washington as a prowler pilot for the United States Navy. She, I'd like to know, she's kind of, she's very intelligent young lady, and she surprises a lot of her cohorts, her men that are with her, included in her group. She surprises them because she learns a whole lot by in a short time, very short time. She learns how to fly 2 or 3 different airplanes while she's there. One of the airplanes she started flying was a P-3A, which is a spy airplane. It was used in Desert Storm as on the outside of the perimeter of the combat zones. They were not allowed. Women were not allowed in the combat zones at that particular time. And she ends up flying. And the P-3A is also an aircraft that has taken out several different watercraft in that Desert Storm. And it kind of tells her story of there, and her father just kind of ends up being along because he ends up as a Mac trip. Mac pilot comes in on the big 747. You remember the 747 that returned the troops from Desert Storm at that particular time? It was one of ours. It had a big ribbon on it that says "Welcome Home, Troops." And again, my history is that of past time. I always believe that we all have stories, and some of us picks them up along the way. And these are stories. They're not. It's fictional. It's all fictional. I didn't want somebody showing up. Hey, that's not me. So they're all fictional, and we used to sit in the back room in Great Falls, Montana, because we were 3-4 hours behind between flights. And to this day, one of the last members of that group, him and I can sit on the phone for an hour or two just talking about our different experiences along the way. If you have any questions, please come through. I might let you know that I'm having a little problem today. I had cataract surgery this morning, and reading is not exactly my best fate right now. So go for it. Any questions? Until somebody comes up with a question, I'll try to go a little bit further here. Joni, the last book I've done, I wanted to go with the same family. It's the first book has already been mentioned as a Hallmark movie of her father. He's loves to play the piano. And in fact, if you go into his love story a little bit further, as I'm going into with his second wife, who finally nabbed her cowboy, as she said, after 23 years. He loves music. His first wife and him, the first date they had was a music. She was being a flight attendant. You always worried about those pilots. It's a big thing about them. But she was really first night he came to pick her up for dinner. He saw her piano and he sat down and started playing the piano. And before the night was over, they had, instead of going out to dinner, they ended up ordering their Chinese dinner in. And she says, her mother, Joni's mother says, told her parents at that particular time, that's the guy I'm going to marry. And she did. And this is after Larry can't return the first time. Larry was called up the second time, and that's when he became a prisoner of war. But he was also an airline pilot. And the story takes him back to the first story takes him back to his own beginning, his ranch where he bought from his family. And he starts flying with the airlines again out of Seattle. And he starts ranching, which is a big chore since it's running about 400 acres. But both of them and all the family seem to return twice a year. The first time they returned was the big cattle drive, which was to the summer pasture. And then the third time they returned was branding, which was usually in August. And then he returned again. It was the cattle drive home. So it kind of brings back my own memories. Remember those cattle drives? We used to trail about 6 miles and separate the calves from their mothers. And many, many nights we'd be up awake while the calves be out there bawling. But it was part of cattle ranching, and I enjoyed every bit of it. And when you're riding a horse or riding up and down the Pacific Crest Trail, in my case nowadays, you talk to yourself and you listen. You listen to the birds, you listen to the coyotes at night, you listen to the fish jumping, and it's all just, it's nature, and you kind of get to listen for it. Here's a question. I just thank you very much. What was one of the most surprising things you learned in creating your books? I guess I learned how to write. I was discouraged for so long, and because of my dyslexia. And the first book I wrote, which is about Larry Becker, was kind of the grammar was not up to par. Fortunately, up the road, I have a neighbor who read it, and he said, Bernie, he says, I'll edit it for you. I'll go over it for you. So he found himself a new job editing my books, and I'm very proud of it. He steps right up and him and I worked in the same school district together. So later on in years. And he's helped me, encouraged me a lot. He's a psychologist, a child psychologist, and he encouraged me a lot to keep going, keep going, keep writing, and it helps when you have somebody behind you like that. People around you help out considerably, whether it's your wife, for instance. My wife has Alzheimer's right now, so it's kind of gives me a time. I'm here with her all the time, and it gives me time to do something that I enjoy doing. I go back to nature, I guess. Both books have uh, a stump on them, a cottonwood stump, which is down by the Sun River in Montana. It's a cottonwood stump that's been there for centuries, probably. But both members of the family have used that stump. I got on Facebook one day and says, let's give the stump a name. So we got one called Econ I. So it's gives everybody a chance to get in there. Bob Montgomery wrote, is there a prequel set of Vietnam War in the works? No, I don't think so. Although I was in the service at that particular time, I've returned once. No, I'm in afterwards. It's the history afterwards is pretty interesting. Larry, for instance, his PTSD, which really wasn't an item until after the Vietnam War. And that studying that particular instance is, I found out that during World War I and II, when our military came back, they came back on ships. They didn't come back on airplanes. And Vietnam, we came back on airplanes. We sat in a 165 passenger airplane. We sat next door to each other, cramped in, and we never talked to each other. For 10 hours, many of us didn't talk to each other. We were just people who were just glad to get out of there alive in one piece and going home. But once we returned home, once those people returned home, not exactly me, but once those people returned home, they found a different world, a world that felt, oh, you're not on television tonight. So this kind of brings it in later on down the road of the after effects. Does the cover have a backstory to it? It does in some respect. The cover is the story. If you, just like this one, for instance, if the cover is, it takes place in the shadows of the Sawtooth Ridge, which is actually there. Joni is off here to the this one over here. I can't even point on the left here. As I said, I got eye surgery earlier today, and it's the airplane that is in the picture is a Prowler, and it's tells the story of Joni. It tells the story of her time in school, her time being the best of the best naval pilot. She also had another problem, a little bit of a problem. She lived up to her father. She had her father's reputation that people would say, "Oh, are you Larry's daughter?" Yeah. How come you knew so much about flying? Well, I'm Larry's daughter. Or my father flew on out of Gulf of Tonkin in Vietnam, and it's just it does have a story, yes. And the other one, just in case, the first booklet I have here, it's of course of her father. He became a 747 pilot. The 747 at the time he came home in 1972, I believe, was just starting to become what we call in airline business the queen of the skies. It was one of the most beautiful airplanes ever flying. It held somewhere in an area of about 362 passengers. I've flown on it all the way around the world, so it's such a beautiful aircraft. And that's what Larry flies out of Seattle. And the bottom is the two horses and the gentleman, two people. That's ranch life in Montana. That was part of his life. He worked his 70, 80 hours a month and came home to Montana, came home to his ranch and worked on his ranch. So, and Joni, she continued all the way through. She did come home a few times from her military service. She was able to come home one time and take part in a cattle drive. It's kind of odd because she met a gentleman down in Texas who ended up going to veterinarian school with her brother in Pullman. And he decided to come home with him. They became friends in Pullman at school for the Falls Cattle Drive. And when they were home, there was a Spanish herder who was also a professor of in Spain, came over to write his thesis, and he did it while he was herding cattle. And she learned how to speak Spanish while she was in Texas at flight school. And her boyfriend was getting a little jealous of the fact that she could speak to this handsome professor. And it's kind of a funny story because the father, after they returned home from to their ranch, had to take the herder into Great Falls, Montana to catch his airplane. And somehow or other, Joni says, yeah, I want to take him in. Of course, Joni could fly just about any airplane, and he was almost scared to get in the airplane with her because he looked at her. He looked at her father and says, "Can your daughter really fly this airplane?" And her father came back and says, "You better not let her ask you that." So, next question looks like Lou Velgez. What important message can you share to the aspiring writers out here or out there? Thank you, Lou. Probably keep going. Keep going. Self-publishing is a very good way of getting your books out there. But the one thing I found out, there are different ways. I would like both my books, in fact, to go to somebody in the movie industry, some director or something and that's the way I kind of trying to edge mine in that particular way. You watch television these days, and unfortunately, even though my wife is Alzheimer's, she hates that shoot 'em up, bang, and everything else that goes on. And she loves the Hallmark Channel, so we watch a lot of Hallmark Channel, or she does. And the other one is, of course, the Seattle Mariner baseball. We are very much into that, and the Seattle Seahawks on Sunday afternoon. She's very much, and I am too. But I usually went to the barn when the Seahawks was on and listened to them on the radio. But keep writing, keep encouraging, and try to write to certain audience that you want to write to. Get the feeling that you can get that feeling into yourself. In my case, I love nature. I love being out in the mountains, catching that old fly on a fish on a fly. It's something I always love doing. Camping and packing into the back country. It's one of my friends who is passed away that kind of introduced me to the eastern front of the Rockies. After the reception, I went back up to the graveyard and I looked down at where his grave was, and it's facing the eastern slope of the Rockies. I had to smile at myself. Ron, you did it again. So, Ron was my buddy. He was the horse cart ride of Western Airlines, and we did a lot of things together over the years. But just keep writing, and find people. If you have hard times with English as far as writing is concerned, find somebody that edits your books for you. Find a friend that knows a lot better. We have people in our writing group who can write without any help at all. English teachers, English professors. We have one gentleman who brought in a book. You wouldn't believe this, on the Irish Army. That was not, and he took a lot of his information from a couple of Irish newspapers and some of their histories throughout the years. And he's basically writing so it goes into the Library of Congress. You certainly come out and talk some more. I don't need to talk all the time. My wife used to accuse me of talking too much. So if you want to ask questions, feel free to ask the questions. Besides that, I'm starting to see a little better now. I still have a hard time, like Lou there, I kind of had a hard time pronouncing his last name. And it's I still have my problems with the language. But I found new ways to do things and work around my dyslexia. And it's coming out pretty good, and I'm happy about it. I really am. And this media that we're going through this week and probably next week, it does good. It does us good to get out with other authors. It does us good to speak to people like us. The media that we are, the Tucson Book Festival, when we were down there with Reader's Magnet back in March, I believe, it gave us authors a chance to get to know each other and so forth, and come up with their stories. Imagine you get 4 or 5 authors together, and the stories that can come out and tell and so forth. I stayed at a place called the Congress Hotel down there, which is right downtown Tucson, Arizona. Not really the place to be on Friday and Saturday night, but 3 or 4 of us authors got together in a lobby, and we had their margaritas, and we could tell stories all night long before it was over with. That's a good way to get to meet people and get the ideas from them and from us too. I'm helping out a little bit with the Writers Club, and I've learned a lot from them also and their reasons doing things. Some people write just for themselves, their families, family histories, and so forth. And I hope to leave something like this for my children at some time down the road. And maybe they'll say, oh, that's my dad. I appreciate it out of them. So again, any more questions there certainly would be nice. I just want to say thank you for tuning in. I think this is a great media way to meet people, meet the authors and so forth. And thanks again for asking the questions. I really do appreciate it. Not only to keep the show going, but again, meeting people, giving ideas out and so forth. It means so much. It means so much to all of us. And again, I think I can't see too well. My little clock down here, I don't know whether I'm running out of time or not, but life goes on. And if you write about your life or write a book, it's here forever. It goes into the Library of Congress back in Washington, D.C. Somebody down the road, 30 years, 40 years, 100 years, will pick up that book and say, huh. So my favorite books, a couple of my favorite books are The Broken Circle, which I really, really enjoyed reading. It's a family leaving Afghanistan after the Taliban took over the first time. It's also very interesting how people and their lives are very strange, and a strange company, and yet they make it through the time in their life. The other one I really enjoyed was The Crawdads Sing, which is being made into a movie, I believe. And it's about a young lady, again, who manages to make it in life, despite the fact that she's not educated. But tell your story if you want to. you have a story, whether you know it or not. There's a story there. In life, as I said, life is great. Life is really it's been good to me. I'm happy. My wife is happy that I'm still around here, being able to take care of her. She looks at me kind of like in the morning and she says, I'm okay. I'm okay. So, despite the fact I only have one eye, basically, the other one's taken care of this morning, uh, I'm okay. So, I'm looking at the time. I think this is about the end of the questions that we have. Unless you have some more, I'm going to say goodbye. And thanks for everything. Thank you, Readers Magnets, for giving me the time to be with these people. And again, thanks again.